and I'm not, like, when you asked me to do the interview, I was like, I don't think it's interesting, but I hope it is. But I'm just saying, like, you can be ruthless if it's not. If you're like, okay, that wasn't that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be.
Okay. Well,
okay.
You
don't know the nerds I've got listening to this.
I've listened to a few of them, though. They're good. I think I did.
We were recording, by the way. I'll edit some of it, but yeah, go on.
But I'd already subscribed to it a couple of years ago.
Oh, thank you.
And had listened to some. And when I went to find it was like it was on my subscription. So I've listened to loads more. Yeah, it's good. But it's also intimidating because you're like, yeah, there's some really good advice in them, and I don't think I've got that. But then I guess you never... If something's instinctive to you,
exactly.
Don't really,
yeah. That's the big thing.
I'll
I've
presume
noticed.
that's the case. Yeah.
Well, that's the big thing I've noticed about doing this for so long is people who have done their job for so long think what they do is boring. And that's not just like people behind the scenes, that's performers as well. They always, when they're asked, oh, what's an interesting thing you do? And they tell them things. And you think people are overreacting in interviews. Yeah. Because they're like, oh, I didn't know you had a thing, but, a little tradition before you go on stage. But the reality is it looks better it's really interesting from the outside.
Yeah.
So, it's...
Hopefully.
Hello, and welcome to the RC Industry Podcast, episode 131. I'm comedian Simon Caine, and for those of you new to the show, this is the podcast where I interview the most influential people from the worlds of stand-up, comedy, radio, and today, freelance TV production. Jason Dawson is a freelance TV comedy producer, primarily based at Avalon. Avalon are one of the biggest and most influential agencies, as well as production houses in the UK, if not the world. Avalon TV have produced hundreds of hours of TV, and Jason has had a hand in a lot of it in the last decade. He's worked extensively with Russell Howard, from booking the stand-up slot on Good News, to attending his work-in-progress shows, building up material for that show. We got into how Avalon TV operates as a company, how to pitch shows to them, his relationship with the Edinburgh Fringe, how often he goes to see live comedy, and more. We also debunked myths such as, does Avalon only book its own acts for the shows it produces? Can you pitch a show without an agent? Is the Edinburgh Fringe still a springboard for TV? And so much more. We did one round of recordings and we had so much fun that Jason emailed me and asked to come back on to talk more about how he uses the Edinburgh Fringe and how TV works and how you can get into it and real practical nitty-gritty advice. I had a great time both times hanging out with him and meeting him. It's the reason why this episode is much longer than one of my normal ones. I think you're going to get loads out of this. Anyone who wants to get into TV or has ever been interested in how shows are made or even discovered as a format will really enjoy this show. If you know someone who will enjoy this episode, please pass it on. I'm going to keep my intro quite short and sweet because I really want to just dive straight into the podcast. But if you'd like to come see me live, there's some links in the show notes. Please check out my shows. I am currently touring around Australia and New Zealand, which is very exciting. First time I've been over there, so if you are in Perth, Adelaide, Wellington or Dunedin, please look me up and come see me in any of those places. If you're not in those places, I'll be back in the UK soon. I'll be doing shows. They'll all be on my website. Check that out. Thank you very much. If you're new here, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you're old here, please do remember to give us an honest, ideally positive review in iTunes. And either way, please do join the Facebook group. It's called RC Industry Podcast, and it's on Facebook, obviously. It's the best place to get your questions asked of future guests via me. But for now, this is Jason Dawson.
Well, so Avalon, so it is a separate entity in terms of how it runs, frustratingly so sometimes, but there's also a synergy of like, it's all under the same building. At the top, it's the same people that exec the shows that manage the company. So there is a link, but you're definitely, it's definitely a separate entity, as in, I'm trying to think of the best way of...
Can anyone submit shows to it?
To Avalon?
Yeah, to Avalon Televisions.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, all there is that obviously there's a communication between, so I know all the agents at Avalon, they're in the building, I talk to them more, so I know a lot more about what the acts are up to. I get invited to the shows and whatnot. So there's acts come in the building, so you talk to them then. So there's just a very basic human level, I see their acts, I'm more aware of what the company's doing, but it doesn't change the separate entity. It is a separate entity in terms of how a production runs. A production is absolutely its own thing. That's not to say that there's not a crossover, but that's at the top, and so it's not something that really impacts when I'm running a production. So when I produced the stand-up slot on Russell Howard's Good News, I think a lot of people thought, all the Avalon acts naturally get booked on that show, and that really wasn't the case. I mean, some Avalon acts left Avalon because they weren't getting booked on that show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process of that is I would draw up a list of comics that I wanted to do it. I'd chat to the execs. Agents at Avalon would pitch in their acts, but in the same way that agents at other agencies would pitch in their acts, and the channel would have a say as well. So it was absolutely just run the way a production would. Obviously, I'm just naturally more aware of who those people are because I'm in the same building. But I think sometimes people think it's just one big round table.
Yeah, that's like a really big misconception. When I put out in my group, in my podcast group, where I say, have you got any questions for this guest?
Yeah.
The big thing was, how come you only book your own acts, or how come? And I don't think it was an accusatory thing, but I think it's kind of like it's seen from the outside that it's sort of this club that once you're part of it. And I suppose, but on a business sense, in a defensive thing, if it was that way, I could understand why it would be, because it does benefit you to have your acts on TV. But I did have a look at because there's like a Wikipedia with it on, and I was looking through them, and they are, it's clear that they're not all your acts.
Yeah, so, and a lot of them that weren't Avalon acts when they should. So someone like Lou Sanders was on Russ Hour's Good News in 2013. She only signed with Avalon last year, and it wasn't part of a big master plan. It's, so I think there was always a fairly healthy mix, and I'd certainly, as a producer, because while I work for Avalon, I'm not for the most part I've been a freelancer, so I've had and I have went elsewhere a couple of other times, so I'm not that deeply embedded in the system that I'm working on behalf of management or anything. So I would always push back if I felt like someone was being pushed. But the exec producers are agents. They believe in their acts. They think their acts are good, so they will pitch them and put them forward. And they've got the ability to communicate why their act should be on the show more easily than an agent at an outside agency. So there's there's naturally that crossover. But I think the record of it's sort of, in terms of the shows I've worked on, I think the record sort of stands up in terms of a balance. Like, it was interesting when a few years ago Stuart Lee made a remark about that. And we'd had acts on Good News that he later put on his show, or that were more alternative and didn't have agents than a lot of the acts that, so I think it's in some ways there's obviously validity to the crossover, but I don't think it's as cynical or as engineered as people think it is. I think it's just on a very human level. And the same way that, in the industry there's that term of is who you know. And I think that just means that there's that crossover, and that's not a PR-ish answer, because if I've ever felt like that's happening, I as a producer I push back. I'm hired to make a show. I'm not hired to work for Avalon as an entire entity.
Completely. It's a similar thing to, like, if I'm walking along Cowgate and I see someone flying the show and I go, actually I've got a time slot free, and they're there, like it's just right place, right time. And if you happen to be in the building, if you happen to be in the exact building all year long, it just works out well for that act, and businessly long term for them to be businessly. Is that a word?
Well, we know what you mean.
You know what I mean. Language is flexible,
especially at this point.
So we're about a week into the Fringe at this point, and so it's day 740.
There's a lot of people just realising what they've done.
Oh my god, I'm so tired. It's been such a long week, and I've only had one day off so far. So
did you start end of July?
Right, so I came up 2 weeks before. I always do 2 weeks worth of like previews around the Highlands.
Oh, that's such a great idea.
So I did Dundee, Crieff. This is not interesting to any of you, but next year, remember, I'm doing them every year. Dundee, Crieff, Aberdeen, Peterhead, Glasgow. I can't remember. There's about. But
that's really smart.
There's about 7 or 8 of them, and then I do all the clubs the week before, and then I come do the show. Nice. So it kind of gets the buzz going. It was really nice. I bumped into like 5 people from the Lemon Tree gig the other night, and I accidentally flyed them. They were like, "It's very funny," and someone else went, "Oh, can I have a fly?" And I went, "You bloody can." So it's actually really useful, and it can. I mean, obviously that's one, but it helps in long term. I think for word of mouth, because it's so. Unless you've got a massive PR here, it's I feel like you get drowned out a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's really smart. I think so many people just preview in London, and then they're in for a shock when they're playing. I know a lot of London people obviously come up to Edinburgh, but in terms of understanding how the material works elsewhere, that's a really smart move. Yeah.
Well, I also like doing it because it's weird because so we're in my room now. It's 28 seats, right? And all the preview shows I did were at least 50 or above, and they were all pretty full. So it meant I was doing more, like even if this sold out, I'm doing it to more people before I've even got to the festival. Which is always weird for me with previews because this year I did more. Even if this sold out every day, I would have done more to more people in previews than I will have done at the Fringe.
Right.
But it's because it's harder, I think, to sell when you're competing. It's like going.
You didn't have 1,000 people coming up to you.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like trying to chat to a girl at a bar. You know, there's 500 people that want to chat to that girl at the bar versus, you know, if you chat to her, I don't know, when she's walking a dog or something. Oh, that's probably not the right analogy, but you know what I mean?
Well, I guess if you both got there when it opened and you were the only people in the bar.
In the bar, there you go, that's the better
It'd be awkward to ignore each other, and then a rugby team comes in and you're
I'm drowning out and the bigger boys and I want to leave.
It's also funny that, and we're in your venue and you're on the stage facing me, and I'm sat in the front row. Just instinctively, we've both we've sat in our natural positions.
I didn't even think of that when I sat down, because normally I do it in the other room, and I've just realised I do the exact same thing in that room, but it's not intentional. It's just where I sit.
That's funny.
It's amazing. I should have left the lights on. Okay, so other people can submit ideas essentially. Okay. So like BBC Studios, it's like an independent. It runs independently, but it is in house. If it is physically in house. So if people wanted to submit ideas, do you have like a certain time of the year like BBC? Like, how do you run that, and how do people protect their ideas? Because I think a big misconception about indie production houses or production houses in general is I'll send my idea and they'll go, it's not for me, and they'll write it down on a bit of paper and use it anyway.
And I won't be the first person to give this answer, but if someone sends in an idea that you really like, why would you not want to work with that person? You know, I think, as in, if it's a really good idea, you'd obviously want to work with them. I think sometimes...
Because they're the creative mind behind it.
But sometimes the mistake that I think a lot of people make is they'll submit an idea, and it's in an area that is naturally is a... If you work in TV, right, and you work in development, which is where these ideas would come to, every single day you're searching and trying to think of ideas. At Avalon, I work in development at the moment on my own, so I don't work in a team. But in other places, if you work in a team, you're gonna be searching high and low for ideas. That's your job. So obviously, the chances are that the idea you pitch is probably being thought of. I mean, I think that's just I was going to say it's a proven thing. I have no stats behind that. But, I mean, I really... It's so bad because I want to give examples, but it's hard without... But let's say you've got a...
Can I say it's 10 a.m, just like, in case anyone's listening, it's very early in the morning as well.
Yes. No, but I'm trying to think about... So, I mean, I'm trying to think... There's actual examples, but I don't want to hurt anyone. But there's like... I
can beep out names if you want, if that
helps. So if you go, I've got this idea of a show that involves films, right? And then 6 months later, that production company is doing a show involving films. What do you think the chances are that they've come to an idea about films because films are massive? You know, so I think some people mistakenly think they've got ownership over that area or genre.
I know exactly what you mean.
Whereas if your idea is very specific, then I think you'd want to work with that person. I know that's how I mean, in terms of projects that I've got at the moment, working with outside people, I'm working with those. They've brought things to me and I'm working with them on the idea. And the idea's evolved since I've got involved. But that was a nice little bit of rhyme in there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's evolved since I've been involved, but it's still fundamentally theirs, and they're involved. So I've done it again.
More rhyming.
It's 10 a.m.
Yeah. And you're a poet.
So that idea of having your idea stolen, I just wouldn't worry about it.
I mean, recently there was the whole Obonjo thing and the dictator thing.
Yeah.
And I remember publicly saying to him, I stand with Obonjo, you know, just because I was getting involved in the thing, and privately sort of saying, there's been Ali G. Sacha Baron Cohen did a dictator a little while ago. He did the thing, you know. There's been that around.
I think Channel 4 did a African dictator show in the late 90s as well.
Think, yeah.
Someone mentioned to me that idea had been done on British television.
Yeah.
Before he was doing it as stand-up.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, but it's not a...
He owns it on the circuit. I think if someone started doing it on the circuit,
definitely.
he'd have more. But it's a weird one, isn't it? Because I know him better than I know the person that's playing the character on stage. I do feel more an allegiance to be like they've probably stolen it from you. But then there's part of my rationale that goes, how hard I personally. If you think about how hard it would probably be to steal an idea, as in like to package it separately or change it enough that you could legally not be. I just think it's more hassle than it's worth. And like you said, if the creative minds come up with it, it just feels like, and I feel like I'm now just defending something that I didn't even put forward. But it just feels like it's more hassle than it's worth. Is that not?
But it's a good faith thing as well. I don't think there's a lot of good faith towards people that work in television. I think there's a presumption that no one knows what they're doing, and that there's and that no one is creative. And it goes back to what I'm saying. There's not this round table at the BBC where they're sitting going, right, what ideas can we next? It's people normally working in separate departments and small team, trying really hard day to day to come up with ideas. And I've worked elsewhere in development, again, like at Avalon. Development's a little bit different, working internally, not in terms of process, but working internally. You're not necessarily working in big teams, but I've worked in a big development team before, and honestly, you try and leave no stone unturned.
Of course.
And so I think their story with that was that they saw an African dictator on the news. And that inspired the idea, and I can see that happen. In a good faith sense, I just completely buy that, because I know when you're in development how desperate you are. But that's not to say that I'm sure it happens, but it happens way less than people think it is. But I understand why it's such a good narrative. If you're struggling, I'm not saying he's a struggling comic. I don't know, but if you're the underdog,
it's easier to.
It fits the narrative to say that the BBC stole your idea, when actually, if you break down the BBC into characters and people. More of them are good people than bad, and I'd be very surprised if that all played out the way a lot of people think it did.
Yeah, so I mean, I do another podcast about time travel, and I remember talking to.
I've read about that after, and it's a really good idea. I need to listen to some.
Please do. But I took it to the BBC because I wanted to do it for Radio 4, and then I did an interview with John Montague at Sky, and I mentioned to him, and he was like, "Oh, I love it. That's a great idea, And now they're doing a show with Ramesh Ranganathan about time travel. Now, there was a part of me because people started sending me links to it when it was announced on Short that went, but then I was like, time travel's not a thing I own. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a format that I could do. It's different enough from mine. Yes, I was working on it with a TV production company that would have probably ended up in a similar area, just because there's only a certain number of ways you can bend that idea. Yeah. But I got over the whole they might have stolen it thing fairly quickly, because so I don't really talk about on a thing before, but I just because it's why bother take it? They've probably got their own production team that they're working on stuff, and also even if they have, like, what would me kicking off to go, you've taken my idea, really solve? Because if they had stolen it, that's not the route to go down. You go down a legal route of of copyright stuff. So I don't know. I feel weird about when people accuse TV. Again, I think it comes down to what you said there, where I think everyone thinks everyone in TV's not creative, because a lot of people badmouth TV by saying, oh, it's all crap, I'm going to watch Netflix. The reality is you're watching something from the 1990s they've just bought on Netflix 99% of the time. So the irony is we're not exactly being that creative, we're watching either. Yeah.
There's just so much content out there now.
There's too much,
that, I've noticed crossovers with comedians' jokes where I'm like, I saw another comic tweet an idea like that, and you're like, have they just seen it and it's seeped into their subconscious? I don't think that person's going through Twitter trying to steal joke. And similarly, you just don't know how someone might have seen a link to your podcast and time travels in their head, and a month later they came up with an idea without knowing what yours were. Again, I'd be very surprised. That's a 0.0% chance that happens.
Exactly,
But it's such an easy narrative, and I do. That's one area I do feel I've met a lot of. Can you swear on this? I've met a lot of wankers in TV. Don't get me wrong, that are not creative.
But
I've also watched a lot of comedians that are not that good. You know what I mean? And then I've watched. I love comedians. And
but they're not to your taste. Let's put it that way.
But so in every industry, there's those people. But for the most part, people get to where they are because they're good and they're trying really hard. I think the most people don't want to steal stuff. Maybe I'm naive, but I certainly wouldn't be able to live with myself if I'd nicked an idea from someone or had even taken the basis of it.
Most of the time now, I'm friendly with Adam Bloom, and he's got this policy of, if I hear anyone doing anything near anything I'm doing, I drop it. Just immediately, I don't even develop it anymore. And I've sort of started to have that policy myself, where, if someone's doing, it's largely why I don't talk about politics, because I feel like it's, I personally don't know enough about policy to do it. John Oliver's got his own team, so he's obviously going to cover it all, and I don't need to, be compared to him any bloody more. And seriously, 2 reviews now. 2 reviews have said
I'm glad you said it, because I was thinking it.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, fucking hell. I've just got glasses. That's all it is. It's not a bloody, so I don't need to be compared to him. And the amount of people that just, have a go at Theresa May for what she looks like, I don't need to do that. I don't need to bully someone based on what they look like. I don't think that's worth doing. So I just get on with my life and I find other things. And it's annoying because sometimes, you know, people will go, oh, that line, I've had this idea for something and someone said, oh, that line's really similar to something Bill Burr did like 5 years ago. And I looked it up because I'm a fan of Bill Burr, but I've seen absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And I was watching it and I was like, well, no, because and in my head I was trying to validate and I was going, should I even carry on with this? Because if one person's noticed it already, is it now more in my head that I've watched it? Is it going to cause me that sort of aggro? And it's sort of like, I don't know, I always think that I don't see anyone as competition, because I think if I did, I'd be too worried we're so similar that's the problem, not that they're competition.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you need to be unique enough that people just book you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, just be undeniably good.
Yeah.
Well. Yeah, I think it's that thing, if you know your intent, and you know that you didn't see that Bill Burr line, and it is, you know, if it's the exact same word for word, then obviously, but that's mad. Now that you are aware of it.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, if you know your intent, I think you should be able to back yourself because there's no one has a monopoly on.
Well, it's a bit like
ideas and areas to talk about.
Completely. I'm doing a compilation show up here called Two Truths and a Lie, and I registered that after the Fringe last year, based on the fact that loads of people kept coming to the show and asking, oh, is it true? Because I was telling a lot of stories last year.
Yeah.
And I had this idea based on a dating app that I was on at the time, which had the game Two Truths One Lie on it, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny to do it with comedians? And this year there's another show that like PBH took on at like May time that has the same title and everything.
The same title?
Yeah, the same title and everything.
Wow.
But it's not in the main brochure because they registered it after, whatever. And they messaged me and were like, oh my God, we're really sorry we didn't know. And I was like, I don't own it.
Yeah.
Like, I came out of it as well. Like, I assume you didn't see it in the brochure and go, we'll add that in again. Yeah. Because that would just be silly. And they were like, oh, you're being really nice about it. And I was like, not really. I just, why would I get angry that you've had a similar idea? If anything, great minds. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, maybe we can co-produce, or we can, cross-promote, or I don't know. Yeah. It just seems really odd.
What's so funny about that is that there's a live show called Werewolf that I'm working on development.
Yeah.
And I mean, just been announced. It's just something we've got in development. But they open the show as an evolved idea that's happened, but it's just at the top of the show is everyone goes around saying one truth and one lie. So I'm just flagging this now.
Okay, fine.
Because imagine if we had that conversation
about the time travel,
and then you see it 6 months later and you're going, God, that is shameless. We were literally talking about stealing ideas. And he's done that. But that was something that came from them.
But there's an exact example of it is where there's only a certain, especially if you're doing straight stuff, as in like you're not doing like weird, surreal, stuff that would just be your mind following an idea. Yeah. There's only a certain number of ways you can bend words. It's why I stopped doing one-liners about 2 years in, because I was realizing that like one-liners are, the usually a turn of phrase that you're just clashing two ideas to in the setup. Yeah. So it's different. And I just realized loads of people have got similar lines, and it's not that they're not funny or I'm not funny, it's just, how am I going to stand out in this? You've got Milton Jones, you've got Gary Delaney, you've got whoever it is. I'm not gonna make it in this area. Yeah. And also, after doing 20 minutes of them for about 6 months, like around the circuit, I was like, fucking boring standing there saying the same 20 lines over and over again.
Wouldn't that's made me think, is wouldn't like somewhere like Twitter be...
Oh, I do them on Twitter.
But wouldn't it be a much better place if people stopped and went, do I need to add to this?
Yeah.
Like, because that's one thing that stops me, so this is kind of separate, but that stops me from getting involved in arguments and everything online, because you're just like, does my voice really need to be heard on this? And it's amazing how many people just want to be heard, but that's a completely separate thing.
No, it's actually not, because before we started, we were talking about messages in Edinburgh shows. And, and a big part of this show, when I was developing it, was I thought it had a message about relationship with social media and blah 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 blah. Right. And John Gordillo, the guy who directed it with me, he was immediately, because I said to him, I just don't feel like my voice is valid in this space. I feel like there's so many more valuable things to talk about, especially in the current climate and blah blah blah. And he was just like, forget all that, you're in your head. It's funny. Right. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't have a message. You don't have to end your show with like a sort of laboured, change the blue to blue lighting, and this is what I've discovered this year. No one cares. It's funny. And it sort of really took the pressure off, where I was a bit like, well, if it's funny, it's funny, and that's where I'm in the listing. Yeah. And it's sort of like, sometimes I do think every show is valid if you want to do whatever on whatever level you think it is. But like I was saying to you before, I do just want to go and see something funny sometimes. Yeah. I really don't want to just hear your truth the whole fucking time. As Russell Howard said the other night where we were, your truth's not funny, you've had some fucking lies in, mate. Yeah. I
think the pendulum's swinging back that way. And that's, it's like we've made a...
I'm not saying that like your story isn't valid if you're doing, like we're talking about Richard Gadd doing another show about, I think he said he was stalked or something. That's his new show. Right. But I think that it's important to know that it can just be funny.
Yeah, I think it's that thing where there's whenever you're making progress, sometimes things go to the extreme to make the progress that you need to, and then it pulls itself back in. I mean, that's just classic, like, left-wing, right-wing politica. That's what happens as well. Yeah, I think it's started to swing a little bit back, where there's a wee bit of backlash against the jokeless sort of strongly themed, deeply personal shows that are maybe not delivering big on laughs, and it'll come back. It's made the progress that it needs to, and it will come back a little bit to getting back to laughter, which is obviously the biggest currency in what you and others do.
Yeah, because when you're looking for, so you produced the most recent one you produced was the thing for Comedy Central, the stand up. I think it was
the Russell Howard Hour on Sky is my most recent.
Oh, sorry.
But actually, in terms of stand up the Stand Up Central show.
Yeah, Stand Up Central show. Yeah. So you, when you were looking for people for that, I presume it was just they're funny. It wasn't they had a message in their 20 minutes. It wasn't, there wasn't, was it, like you said, the channel had something to do with it? How did quotas affect that show? What's the realistic thing behind the scenes on that?
Well, with that, so there was 2 slots. There was the sort of 8 to 10 minutes headliner, and there's the 5-minute not open spot, but you know what I mean, it's the newcomer spot. So I did, really, with the 8 to 10 minute, I worked on series 1 and 2, and the channel want names, so profile is the most important thing with that. That's less interesting to me, to be honest, because it's like, I mean, one of the things from doing the stand-up slot on Good News, it was breaking new talent was the most exciting thing, but the climate was very different then. That was the only show that was doing that at the time, whereas when Stand Up Central was happening, there was a lot of other shows on that were stand-ups were getting on TV much quicker. So the 5-minute spots are really where you could be interesting. And with that, there's what? So there was 10 slots. Maybe we recorded 12 for 10. We held open. We did, I think, 3 audition nights where we with and it's not ideal, but at the very least everyone's been put on the same pedestal. That I think there was like maybe 12 to 15 acts doing 5 minutes at each of them. I'd be there. The Avalon execs would be there. Comedy Central people would be there. It's all in front, pretty much. I mean, it's 3 nights, but it's in front of the same audiences, so everyone's given the same chance. We all then drew up our lists, and then almost in a kind of like, well, let's see who's on yours, let's see on ours, and then came to the best sort of diverse list of comics. I mean, diverse in terms of voice, not just. And so when you look, you do have to. I mean, I looked at it as a group of 10 to 12 comics that ideally are all doing something slightly different. There was a series of Good News way back when I booked like basically 4 white middle class males all in a row, and this was before the quotas thing was a big deal. But by the 3rd week, I realised I'd made a massive mistake in doing that, because it was just getting samey every week. So there's just on a completely comedic merit, it was boring, even though they were all very good acts. So with Stand Up Central, it's a collaboration really, and the channel have some people they like that they put forward for the auditions. There's agents that want their acts to be seen at those nights, and you kind of pick from there. And then I've got people that I've seen in Edinburgh or seen on the circuit that I want to try. I had a couple of people on my team as well that would suggest people. So the audition nights were a great opportunity. I mean, we gave, there was probably about 40-50 acts were seen, so that's a kind of good pool. You can't see everyone, but I thought that was a kind of fairly good pool to choose from. And in the end, there's always a bit of compromise here and there, where there's reasons why a channel want someone on there, maybe because they're going to be in another show on the channel, and in the end they're paying for it, so they do have final say, and all you can do from my end as a producer, I care more about quality, and I will sort of kicking and screaming until the final line. I'll try and get the people that I want on there. But it is a collaboration. It's not as not as I think some people think. There's just that going on. Right. Well, we'll have 8 Avalon acts, and that's that. And if Avalon didn't have a lot of good young acts at that point, there wouldn't have been a lot of Avalon acts in those 5. And those 5-minute spots,
I always find that really, because I think there's also that. I mean, there's 3 questions out of that. I mean, first one would obviously be, does TV still break a comedian? Because TV viewers are down. People don't necessarily who watch that go out to comedy. In terms of does it still break comedians? So I suppose I'll start there. And 2, a lot of I think it's a general thing in the industry. I think I've always said that I just want to be well known enough that my opinion is respected and not treated as just because I'm jaded. Do you know what I mean? Because I think people dismiss people's opinions at a certain level and go, "Oh, it's just because you're jaded, you didn't get it." And it's a bit like, no, I actually have an opinion. Please respect my opinion, you know.
Yeah.
And I think they do it a lot with acts where they go, oh, that person got picked up too soon, or that person got put on TV, you know, before they were ready. And sometimes you have to validate and go, well, actually, if it's their first time on TV, they might just be nervous because they're on TV for the first time.
Yeah.
Or it might just be they're going to get better at it, like they're better than their first gig.
Yeah.
Than now. So I'm wondering whether you look out for those sort of feedbacks, whether, you know, when someone goes on for the first time, if people are on Twitter, for example, tweeting, insert comedian's name, wasn't very good tonight, you know, look nervous, or something like that, whether you take that on board, or whether you ignore things like that because it's ultimately damaging to your process. So I don't know where you want to start with those
so the first one in terms of does it break, it's definitely harder now because there was so as I say, like when I did the Good News stand-up slot, that became, you know, by accident almost like a real reference point for people. Is like that's where you go see the new breakout acts because they weren't getting that opportunity elsewhere. So I know anecdotally from those acts and through YouTube hits and whatnot that it was really beneficial for a lot of, and part of that was that they couldn't get that footage of them doing stand-up elsewhere. Obviously now people can film and put their I mean the is it Hot Water Comedy Club?
Oh, they do it a lot.
God, it's an incredible. Yeah. I mean, what an incredible success that is. So it's much easier now to be seen online. TV does, I mean, I think, to be honest, it's probably panel shows that make the biggest difference for a comic. So it's definitely not as prestigious as it was. I don't think there's that sense of, oh, this person must be great, especially if they're on a show. So like with Stand Up Central, there was only 2 acts a show, and Russell, because he had a reputation for introducing acts, I think there's prestige to him to being on his show. You're only one of 2 acts on the show. There's a sense of, oh, this person must be really good. If you're on like a bill of 5 or 6, I don't think it's going to have much impact really, other than being a good credit to list for your Edinburgh show or to other promoters to get booked live. Definitely happens less. But then with Stand Up Central, you know, like Yuriko Katani did a set and that went viral. It was like the top of Reddit at one point, and that did wonders for her. So it can still happen. But that again, and that speaks to, I mean, the 2 big sort of viral hits, not 3 actually, but Mae Martin and Daniel Simonson from Good News and Yuriko Katani, 3 very different, distinct voices. So that speaks to the value of having someone that's saying something or is from somewhere that's unique, that stands out. So I think if you're unique and you stand out, you've still got a great chance of breaking through if you appear on one of those shows. And then the other question was, how impacted I am by feedback?
Yeah, I suppose so. It's a combination of social media, and I think we've all probably at some point, in fact we were talking about beforehand, but we weren't dismissing people, but we're saying that sometimes people will say, oh, they only got that because they're a woman, or they only got that because they're an act from a foreign country, or they'll dismiss them being able to get something as a result of something arbitrary about them. Right. And I'm wondering whether you look out for that feedback in terms of, so that you know just who's saying what and the general zeitgeist of how people are perceiving a certain segment of acts. Yeah. And also whether you listen to social media feedback for, you know, like maybe if you search for a certain comedian's name who you put on to see how people responded to them, because it could just be they're very funny in clubs but they're just not good on TV and vice versa. So I'm just wondering whether you take feedback on board or whether you just go with your gut.
I definitely, well, I guess it's 2 things, because I mean I can't retrospectively not book them.
No, you could not book them in the future is what I mean. So it's
right. Yeah. I mean the problem is that with social media, by the time, so if I've booked someone to do the show, and I say that, you know, as a collaborative obviously with Channel and what, it'll be because I believe that they're really good and I believe they're ready to do it. One thing that a lot of acts don't understand is I'll go see someone and I'll think they're really good, but I just don't think they're ready for TV yet, but they will never understand that, because for them they're at the most advanced stage they've ever been at, because it's not the future. And I know that comedians are always evolving and getting better, right? So if they believe that they're good enough, then you can't persuade them otherwise. But I've always tried to, in a very genuine way, be quite sensitive to that for their benefit. So really, I'd like to think that for the most part, I could back myself in saying that when someone's been booked, I feel that they're ready and that they're good enough. You never know what's going to happen on the night, and it's my job to protect them in the edit in whatever way you can. And sometimes that's it. If you're savvy with the edit, with, you know, adding in laughs and whatnot, maybe where it wasn't on the night, you know. But if I know that, I try and know the set inside out, so I know where the laughs are. If they haven't happened on the night, you boost it in the edit and and as long as the person's performed it to a decent to great standard, it should look great and be a representation of what they do. In terms of the social media feedback, people want to hate stuff more. Like, people don't like new stuff. I think there used to be a prestige where if you were watching TV, you'd think that these people are superstars. Now there's an immediate sense of why are you on my TV, and you have to prove otherwise. So I definitely look, and it's definitely interesting, and it's valid. I mean, if the demographic of the show hasn't enjoyed someone, then brutally you haven't done your job. But I wouldn't pay it. It's like, if I read a review on TripAdvisor, I'd love to see the person's face to know whether it's valid or not. There's people on social media that just want to hate on things, and comedy is subjective. So unless it's overwhelmingly negative, it's probably not going to have much impact on me in terms of whether I think that person's good or not. And also, and it's something I fight for on the shows, particularly with Stand Up Central, because of some issues with getting clips online, is the truth isn't the success in seeing how many views it gets online. That's a great barometer, and even if they've got 1 million views and there's loads of vitriol below, you're like, well, 1 million people were interested in watching that clip, so you've done your job, and that person, and the comics done their job. They're clearly of note and of worth and worth consideration. But so it's in terms of someone being considered for something, then down the line, it's based on whether they're right for that next thing. And so I'd like to think it doesn't have much impact.
Well, I've got a question about that then, but before we move on from that, you mentioned adding laughs in and sort of boosting the laughs in the edit.
Yeah.
There's mixed reviews on whether canned laughter is a good idea or a bad idea. Is it? I mean, where's your opinion on that? If I just leave it as an open question like that.
For stand-up, I think if you know where the laughs should be or normally are, and the comedians left space for them, then you absolutely should do it to do service to the set that they do. To not do it based on how an audience reacted one night for whatever reason, and sometimes that's not within the comics' control. I mean, it might have been that there was a technical issue where that just killed the live audience for 20 minutes, and then someone has to come out and the audience just don't respond the way they do. I think it'd be unfair to not help the comic, and that's it. So I see it as helpful. You're not pulling out canned laughter from a 1970s sitcom. No. You're taking it from the live track of the audience that night, so it's hopefully sounds natural and isn't noticeable. The only person it might be noticeable to is the comic, really. So I don't see the problem with it. If the comic's left the space for it, I mean, you have to be careful with it, obviously, and not use it where it's not needed and not overdo it. But I think overall it's good. People are weird about TV edits. Do you remember that Comic Relief did a 24-hour panel show? Yeah. And it was like they did a hybrid of 8 out of 10 Cats and Have I Got News For You? Oh, I'm probably not Have I Got News For You, maybe Would I Lie To You or whatever. Yeah. And it was so boring because it hadn't been edited, and people somehow thinking editing is dirty. And actually, it's for your benefit because you cut out all the faff. It's a good thing, but it's weirdly considered dirty in some ways.
I have the same thing with podcasts where sometimes people will go, "Oh, I'd love to hear the unedited version," and I'm like, "You really wouldn't."
Absolutely.
I did a sometimes you lose track of time when you're chatting to someone or whatever, and I did a 3-hour record with a person the other a couple of weeks ago, and I got it down to about an hour and a half, and it was because we went off on tangents and they repeated themselves and I repeated myself, all that sort of stuff. And I remember just saying, "Oh, it's lovely to spend 3 hours with someone that is so educated and all that sort of stuff." And I got a few emails from people just going, "Oh, you should have released the 3-hour one." I'm like, no, honestly, we just repeated ourselves. You don't want to how much are you avoiding your own inner thoughts that you need 3 hours of us just saying the same shit over and over again?
Although interesting with stand up, it's different because you do feel, again, I try and know the person's set inside out. So and I try and foresee edits that I'll have to make, and I try and talk to them about it and make sure that they're comfortable with those edits, because that's their material, it's not mine to mess with. And it's like editing a song, it's and especially I remember on Stand Up Central editing James Acaster's set, and it was just too long, but I felt like I was editing a Beatles song. You're like, he's so precise and everything's so perfectly worded that it just feels like sacrilege to cut it, but you have to for time. That's just brutal. But I really fight hard on that if execs are trying to make changes to sets that I know are going to ruin the flow of them. So I try and protect that as much as possible, but inevitably I think that is a more controversial area, is editing stand-up sets. It's like, who are you to... There's so many reasons that certain words are in there, or the pacing is done in a certain way, and you have to be so respectful to that. Like on Good News, they recorded 20 minutes that would get edited to 14, and I would paper edit straight after the show. So what I'd do is I'd invite the act to come and sit and watch it back with me, and we discuss it together, so it's a collaboration, so that when they watch it go out, there's no nasty surprises. And if anything significantly changes from that paper edit, when we actually do the proper edit, I'd communicate that with them beforehand and explain why. And it's just so important, because it's not as a
it's how they're going to be represented to a much wider audience than maybe they would even do ever in any clubs.
Yeah.
And
give them the choice. If you're going, I could either lose this from that bit or this from that. That should be their decision.
Yeah,
like
totally.
it's not mine to make. It's their material. So I think with editing, laughs, I think that's protected. That's protected.
Yep.
But with the set, you've got to be so careful that you're respecting the act's set and making sure that they're completely aware of what you're doing, because I imagine it's just there's nothing worse than seeing someone just absolutely butcher. Like I don't know if you saw the Britain's Got Talent set with Kojo?
Oh yeah.
But what have they done to that set? Like it's crazy, and it's because they've cut it down like it's the highlights of a song.
Yeah.
Because that's the way they edit things.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely brutal. It's like just stripped all the nuance out of the bits, and they don't look like comedy routines. That was brutal. Yeah, so you've got to be respectful in that sense. Completely.
And I think another sort of offshoot to that conversation is something that you sort of touched upon, where comedians statistically they get better with time. Like I think that's a general rule. I mean, some people never do. Some people take a bit longer to get better. And I think there's a little bit of negativity with younger people getting put on over older people who are maybe better because they've been around for longer.
Yeah.
Because potentially TV channels think, well, youth attracts youth and blah, blah, blah. Where do you stand on that? Is there any truth in that matter?
I think it's definitely true. It's an ugly truth. What I'd say is advice for comics is in a fair, completely equal system, your career and your progress would be tracked on a yearly basis by everyone, and they're aware of how good you've become or where you're at now and whatnot.
Nice.
The truth is, be careful the first time people see you, and that goes for both appearing on TV and live. I'm sometimes invited to shows, especially in Edinburgh, and the comic's just not ready to be seen. And as much as I want to then give them a chance down the line, if it's been not to my taste and I don't think they're ready, and I'm invited again next year, it's very hard to shake that prejudice on a purely human level. There's so many comics I've seen that I've been maybe fairly dismissive of, that I've then seen a few years later, and they're completely different and amazing. And I've been so wrong on whether they were going to get good or not. Normally, sometimes you see someone and they're really interesting, and I can take a comic at the level they're at and accept that they're not perfect, and for the most part, I'd like to think that I'd then I would be that producer that monitors how they get, but you can't do it with everyone. And so I think that, there's an email I got from a guy who has never done stand-up before, and he's doing one show in Edinburgh for 40 minutes, and he's written all his jokes. I don't want to say the name or anything. I mean, I was actually, when I got the email, my instinct was to tweet it, and I was like, nah, I can't have to do this. It'd be so unfair to do it. But he's emailed tons of producers and people at channels, because he included us all in the email without BCCing, and always BCC because it feels more personal. Yeah. And he basically went, I'm absolutely amazing, and he actually compared. He said, think of the record label that missed out on the Beatles. You don't want to be that. Wow. And he linked to a set on YouTube that was a robot reading his jokes, and he said, come and see me on this date. And you're just like, you've never done a stand-up gig. Yeah. So it's like your intent should be get on the circuit and become good, and then invite people to see you. But he's invited some really, I'm not including myself in this, but he's invited, I can see from the emails, he's invited some really top people. But now if any of us see his name, we're not going to give him the for the most part there's going to be a prejudice there. So you have to be very careful when you're seen, and that goes for appearing on TV as well. Sometimes someone will appear on telly and they're not the finished article yet, and to viewers and to commissioners 3 years down the line, well, they were on telly 3 years, they're an old name now, when actually 3 years later is when they've become the comedian that they really truly are. They fulfilled their potential. So that's frustrating, because I've had that with those comics that I love, that I want to put on things, and you mention them to the channels and they're like, nah, it doesn't really interest us. Who's this new person? It's just it's just because they've got no preconception of them, and but they've never seen them. But sometimes if you've been around for ages and just on the circuit, and you suddenly emerge and have a breakout show, they'll swarm around you, and you're still, and it's not related to age necessarily, or even how long you've been going. It's just about when you were seen, I guess. Yeah, no, I and that's hard. It's not fair. It's not fair, but it's just the way it is, unfortunately. Because in the end, it's like, again, from my point of view, I can say it's not fair, but I still have to convince the person paying for the show that this person should be on it. I think it's a combination of entitlement and I suppose, because for me personally, TV is of interest, but
but I think one of the big reasons why it's of interest is because it's easy for my mum to tell her friends what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if she says, oh, he's going to appear on Channel 4 tonight, that's very easy. If I say, oh, I'm doing this club in Deptford or whatever, it's much harder for her to explain why I'm excited about that.
She's just getting no sense of what's successful.
Whenever she says, how's it going, I'm like, do we have to have this conversation again? Because if I tell you how it's going and it's going well, you're not going to understand why it's going well. And if I tell you it's going badly, you're just going to look at me as if to go, where's your plan B? And I don't really want to have either conversation.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting, isn't it, in terms of that. So in terms of TV, I think it has replicated the circuit a lot, in the sense that a lot of people are being shown a left wing and sort of very liberal leaning. Yeah. And I know there's been a few things, like for example the Jeff Norcott thing that came out a few days ago, which was the sort of more right wing than most things that have come out there. Why is it so much that TV is being or trying to be seen as, or maybe even not trying, but just is producing more left leaning and liberal TV versus right-wing comedian?
I think that's reflective of the circuit, isn't it? Like, there's not many right-wing. I mean, I do think that the arts in general do lend themselves to left-leaning people. I think generally. So I think that's just I think TV's just reflecting that. I don't think there's any agenda to keep right-wing comics off TV. I mean, for me personally, I like that balance. I think that, what's so frustrating is when Andrew Lawrence did that first post, I actually thought he made some really good points in it. And it is true that the easy comedic route to get applause from audiences is to slag off whoever the villain is, when actually it's way braver and more interesting to explore the nuance of that. I actually thought he made some really interesting points, but then
he went left.
But then there's others in there that were senseless, and then he doubled down and sort of, I think, enjoyed the outrage that came from it, and maybe that's just a natural defensive reaction, because he did make some good points that people ignored because of some of the other less savoury points he made, and then he just went on this complete route where I've not seen a full hour of his, but I get this impression that he's just went a more unsavoury route, when actually the starting point was, but I guess it's maybe the feedback he got wasn't nice. There should definitely be space for people with different views. Phil Wine does a great bit in a show this year about how art is I don't want to butcher this, but essentially it's like art is supposed to reflect humanity, and humanity is not always good. So in comedy, this idea that we put comedians on a pedestal to be good people and to stand for all the right things is nonsense, and it's such a good point. And you do wish that maybe the space at the moment doesn't allow for that nuance. There is a fear. I mean, we've got it on Russell's show. It's interesting because Russell is definitely left-leaning.
Russell Howard.
Russell Howard. He's definitely left-leaning, but he's got some more interesting views as well that are a bit more nuanced and across the spectrum. And it's hard to take those chances on TV because you can easily alienate or easily become a clickbait. A source of clickbait where that's misrepresented, and suddenly it's like he's known for being, all the things that he says that chime with people more are ignored, and they go for this maybe more nuanced point. So I think to be right way on telly is quite brave. As long as you're doing it in the right way, though. Like Jeff does it in the right way. I don't know how anyone could consider him extreme or far right or anything. He's not. It's like in society we have a sliding scale of conservatism and liberalism, and TV and comedy should hopefully reflect that. But I do think the arts generally leans itself the other way.
Yeah, totally. My frustration at the moment is the climate of like you said, clickbait. I think journalism is having a negative impact on comedy at the moment, just because they want ad sales, and the easiest way of doing that is by almost paraphrasing comedians or taking jokes out of context just to get your traffic to the site. And I think that's causing a lot of comedians a headache, because if they want to say something horrific as a joke, that's going to be your top hit until you do something else that pushes it down. And it might not even, and they might never cover the nice thing you did. And it's a weird one, because I think journalism was something that was useful for a while, that was helping comedians come up, and was sort of like, trying to support, it was that sort of synergy of supporting each other out. And now it's kind of becoming eating its own tail, because it's sort of, I don't know. And I think TV's additionally sort of having it's having a positive impact as well, but it's also having a negative impact in that, clips of things are getting taken, like people are pirating them and putting them online, and they might have genuinely good intent where they're like, oh, I love this joke, but when you take it out of context of the whole set, that joke, you know, like I had to submit some jokes for The Guardian the other day for the top 10 thing, and I remember emailing it off, and I said to a friend, I've sent in this joke that just goes, I've just read this book, I've been trying to learn more about equality, and I've read a book called Invisible Women by someone, right? And it's just a silly little, and my friend was like, you know, out of context how that looks, I've seen your show, but out of context that one line can make you look like you're being dismissive of, and I was like, no, it's obvious because the book's called Invisible Women, so it's whatever. And he was like, I don't know if the Guardian readers are gonna, you know,
it's that bad fit, it's that faith thing, isn't it? It's just everything's taken in the worst possible faith, and there are some rotten eggs out there.
Yeah, of course.
You know? Yeah, it's really it's and that's why Edinburgh is really interesting. I feel like this year, from what I've only been here a few days, but when I was saying earlier about the pendulum is swinging a little bit, I think comics are looking more inwardly at themselves on the left, and I consider myself left leaning, but I'm probably more critical of the left than I'm the right.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
In the same way that I'm more critical of my football team's tactics than I am a football team that I don't follow. Why would I care about Oldham?
Yeah.
I care about Falkirk FC, the biggest. And it's so frustrating. What's it gonna? Yeah, but it's like with TV. So TV doesn't have TV comedy doesn't have the nuance of live comedy in the scene. TV by its nature, in terms of its wide reach, is going to be broader always. I get so frustrated by this. Not really to do with comedy, but he is a target in comedy. Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain is a character act. That's not Piers Morgan the person. It's a character act, and it frustrates me so much that he gets taken at his word and people react and create outrage over things he says. When you're like, he's doing it for hits and for clickbait. It's like he's human clickbait, and it maddens me that people don't see that. But I think that's because he's always been a person up to this point. Do you know what I mean? Like he's always been seen as who he is. So I suppose it's a bit like who's the so I don't mean to interrupt you, but you know the conspiracy theorist, not Alex Jones. There was the one. He used to say things that were like correct. You know, this business runs this business does that about the, you know. But then he'd say, but they're all lizards. You know, like as soon as David Icke. Yeah. So like it started with like, you're a person, you're having good ideas. Yeah. And then I mean, I don't know if he's a character as such, but I feel like at times he might be playing up to it. I don't know. Maybe that's just that's a problem. They sort of and again, it's like
you lose nuance.
I don't want to talk about Andrew Lawrence too much because I've not seen his shows in the last few years. But it's that thing where you start off by on a very human level, maybe making a nuanced point, but the way the world reacts to it pushes you into that box, and you almost become what they say you are, sort of thing. But with Piers, it's so I don't know. It's mad that we're talking about Piers Morgan when it's like we're up at the Edinburgh Festival, but it's like he in that show he's even said it in interviews himself. He's like, I'm just trying to draw people to the show. As a person, I'm way more flexible in my views and way more. But I think he's
not Katie. What's her name?
Katie Hopkins. Yeah.
Well, I think she really believes most of the things she says. I've met her, and she's much more reasonable than you'd imagine when you meet her. However, she does believe most of the things you tell, or at least she was doing it when she was talking to me off camera. Because I bumped into her at the Caves when she was trying to put together a TV show a few years ago, and I spoke to her about half an hour or so, and she was just very much like, well, you know, abortion is a thing, and good fat kids, and all this sort of things, and it was like the cameras aren't even rolling. I don't know if you're trying to get into character or what, but you don't seem to not have the same views.
I wonder if it's a defense mechanism where people hate you for those views so much that it's almost like, again, like the person that they're portraying you as, you almost have to become that in order to deal with it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Rather than
double down.
Yeah, I know, because that's the only way you can sanely deal with that. I mean, maybe I'm not being an apologist for her at all. No. But with Piers, what's interesting with Piers is that in America, the thing that brought him down in America was how much he'd campaign for the gun laws to change, which is which we'd associate with left wing. I think he's just a lot more centrist he's probably centrist just to the right.
Yeah.
But he's but the Good Morning Britain Piers is like far right.
Yeah.
Like brought more in that territory, and I say far right. It's like what are the things that he's really going on about? Greg's, sausage rolls and whatnot. Yeah. It's not really extremist stuff, but sorry, that's probably a bit off topic for where we're going.
No, it's not. But it also brings up a good point about sort of, because it's interesting what you're watching out for and trying to stay in terms of the zeitgeist of other comedy and characters and that sort of stuff. So I suppose it brings me on to, what's your relationship like with the live circuit? What's your relationship like with Edinburgh?
Yeah.
What are you scouting for if and when you are looking? I mean, I suppose it comes down to the individual show, because if I were to ask, do you book character acts, do you book sketch groups, do you book improv, that sort of thing, it would probably come down to the individual show. But I suppose, do you even not go and see those because you're like, well, I only book stand-up because I do those? So
not necessarily. I mean, it changes every year in terms of my intent of why I'm up in Edinburgh. But where to begin? Because I guess. Should I talk through how I approach Edinburgh and maybe how I've approached it this year for my intent this year? Because in previous years, so if I'm coming up for Russ Hour's Good News, I am going to stand up solely. But I also, with Good News, there was we'd have an external writing team of spotters, so they'd watch like the news and they'd write gags and what. So I'm looking at writing as well, and we've had like Kerry Pritchard McLean has become a writer on the Russell Howard Hour, and that stemmed from I was aware of. I mean, Russell and I both aware of her as a stand-up, but I was aware of how good a writer she was and got her to submit, and there was an opportunity at that point to become a member of the writers' room. And so I wasn't necessarily looking at her as a stand-up in that case. It was as a writer. So there's different opportunities to pick, and you never know. The Edinburgh Festival is really useful just for getting for being able to have a broad view of the comedy circuit generally. And whilst I'll come up with an objective, there might be people I see that they don't fit that objective, but in 6 months they do. The way I approach it is I do this time I'm up in a development capacity, so that can be anything. That can be formats and like last year, so I was mentioning Werewolf Live, which was a format I saw last year, and at the time it was just done for and it just involved the audience, and then they did a version with comedians that I thought was really good, and then I started having meetings with them and talking about it, and now at the moment we're working on developing it live with a view of taking it to TV, but that's not going to see a stand-up show. That was just like, that stood out to me as a format and I was interested in seeing it. So with development, it can be anything, but I'm aware of, I should be aware of what channels are looking for, and so you're looking to find things that will fit into that brief of what they're doing. So with Edinburgh, in very layman's term, I sit down with a brochure. I work out, so I've got a timetable of what my schedule will be. I've got a document where I put all so early afternoon, late afternoon. I just be like 5 to 7 p.m. And I go through the brochure, and anything that takes my interest, I put in that document. And then I go through that document and I start trying to put them into a schedule. So in a basic term, in a very pure term, I do go through the entire brochure and try and pick out what I think is interesting.
So can I ask, people that email you their show and their press releases, does that come into it, or do you just ignore those and just do the brochure?
It does. I mean, agents email and they invite you to all the shows. I respond much better to specific recommendations. So if an agent emails me with their 12 acts, but they go, this one particular person I'm really excited about. I know comedians might not want to hear this, that their agents do this, but they'll know what I'm into. They'll know the show I'm doing. If they say, I really think you should see this person, I'm way more. That's been personalised to me as a recommendation, so I'm more likely to try and factor that in. But I do tend to go from my own instinct of going through the brochure and the things that pique my interest, and then it's also dependent on what I'm going to be working on or the type of thing that I'm, the brief I've sort of given myself. So I go through and I just try and fit in as many in, and then I try and leave gaps to allow for shows that break through at the festival to try and see them as well. The one thing I'm not saying that like other people in telly don't do this, but I don't come up for pleasure at all. There's people, I'd love to see a Daniel Kitson stand-up show in Edinburgh, but he doesn't do TV, so I can't justify going to see him for an hour. So I always make sure that I'm going to see that, especially if I'm requesting a comp ticket, and that is an interesting area in itself.
Yeah, I'm worried about us running out of time, but I was going to ask you about that.
Oh shit, yeah.
'Cause I've got a show at midday.
Oh fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
That's okay.
So I will make sure that if I'm taking a ticket for a show, I'm seeing it for a reason, and it's professional, and it's not personal pleasure. So that's a big thing for me. I try and see a wide I do try and see a wide range of stuff, and not just see the big hitters. I'm aware that there's loads of people that feel ignored in Edinburgh, and they'll probably dispute that. The other thing I'm so aware of, and I just want to be clear on, is that I'm aware that the Edinburgh Festival isn't all about TV people coming up to see the shows. For some acts, they really want that, but I'm very aware that for some acts, it's about comedy, and that my involvement in the Edinburgh Festival is not something that's particularly liked or desired. And so, if there's anything in this interview where it's like I'm trying to be like give advice to comedians about how they approach Edinburgh, it's purely on the basis of if you're interested in why I'm up there and are interested in getting the attention of someone that's a TV producer or whatever. But I'm aware that that's not for everyone. I just want to be because that's the thing I was really self-conscious of, was like, I know the Edinburgh Festival is not just from me and my like.
No, I know it's a weird one because I think maybe 5 years ago, a lot of people came up to either get an agent or get on TV. Those were their like goal aims, and I think it's very much shifted because of these misconceptions. Because people are going, well, they're just not interested in me, or I'm not young enough, or I'm not white enough, or I'm not black, or whatever the excuses in their head. Whereas, like you said, not repeatedly, but you've reiterated at different points. You know, it might just be you're not right now. Or you're not good enough right now. Yeah. And that's not. It's hard to take. You know, like to be told you're not good enough right now. But frankly, there's a lot of money on the line, and you know, you've got to produce a product for the person that's paying for it.
Yeah, and there might also just be 6 other shows in that time slot that I have to prioritise over your show, and I'm only up for a certain amount of time. And it's so, I know that's so frustrating, but to the comic, it's like that 1 hour of the day is so important. That show's the most important thing in your month, and the idea that someone can't spare an hour to see it sounds crazy to them, but it's like, yeah, but I've got a list of 100 shows and I'm trying to squeeze them all in, and it's hard. I mean, ideally you'd see everything, but as we were discussing, like I do see like 6-7 a day, which is a real challenge. I mean, it's like you're seeing comedy, it's great, but that is also it's difficult, and there's just only so much to see, but I say that with regret, obviously. It's not.
I'm going to ask you the last quick fire questions, just because I want to definitely get some of these in for you. Who was the first person to believe in you?
To believe in me?
Yeah.
So Avalon, there was a producer, Mark Eden and Robin O'Brien, who basically kept me on. So I did a series of Good News, and they kept me on to do a show called Show and Tell, because they could tell I was really enthusiastic and went to a lot of live comedy. So definitely them, because they gave me the stand-up producing slot on Good News. Yeah.
What's one unpopular opinion you have about the TV industry?
Oh boy, this is so. I think everyone will probably say this to you, but it's not. I don't think it's unpopular in the industry, but not unpopular. But just taking chances on new talent. I do believe, when I think of how I came to love comedians when I was a teenager watching them, if I switched on the telly and saw someone that I didn't know, I wouldn't just immediately turn it off because I don't know them. I'd be like, it's a natural thing, especially in youth. You love discovering new talent. Like, you love discovering something. I watched The Office on its first run when no one watched it, and I loved shouting my mouth off about it, and then it became really popular and boring to say you like The Office, but people really like discovering things for themselves. And I think taking an opportunity on new talent and trusting that people will give them a chance is something that this industry is so shy of. And I understand why, but I think it's blindly ignoring how people come to new talent. And
So who do you think's the most underrated person in the TV industry?
That's such a wide open
question. It can either be behind the scenes or in front of the camera. It doesn't matter.
Is it person or type of person?
Either way. I keep it open on purpose.
Okay, well, type of definitely editors. Yeah, they perform miracles.
Yeah. What do you think's the biggest problem in the TV industry, and how would you go about solving it?
I think the new talent thing is definitely, but I also think working conditions. A lot of people don't realise how long hours that people in telly work, and how they it can be a well-paid job, but you don't get paid overtime or anything. I remember I'll try and say this quick, but I remember when Russell Howard was doing Stand Up Central, I promised him that I'd go to every warm-up gig that he did, and he ended up booking in 5 a week for 2 months. So I spent my life, I'd be in the office during the day, and then I'd go to his gigs at night, some of it out of London and whatnot. I remember halfway through he went, "You must be killing it in overtime." And I was like, I don't get paid a penny for doing any of this extra stuff. So I think working conditions are something that, like, the production teams especially with tightening of budgets, production teams work so hard for sometimes so little, because it's not the same as in other industries where you get overtime and whatnot.
And if you had one bit of advice for a few thousand comedians who maybe want you to come to their show, what would it be?
Be real. It's more than ever now. Just be really undeniably funny. Like, I think people get so caught up in everything else, and in the end they forget about the product. Especially in Edinburgh, you've got don't worry about whether there's a viewer in it back. Worry about the people that have paid to come and see you, about being really funny for those people in front of you, because that's the people that will make you. I know that there's like industry makers and all, but in the end, we need people to watch our stuff, and if audiences react to you, that's the best recommendation that an industry person can have, is how an audience reacts to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope that was all right.
Hello. Right. The podcast was meant to stop here, You've just heard I did my final questions, but Jason enjoyed the first part so much that he emailed and asked to come back on, and we organised a time during the Edinburgh Festival, which, by the way, you got to give him a lot of props for this, because Edinburgh is a very busy time for everyone, and the fact that he made time to record about 4 hours worth of content for you, and this has now been edited down to whatever it has been edited down to in the end. Go and give him a tweet and say thank you very much, because if you've got anything out of this, he deserves a really big pat on the back. If you're enjoying this and you want to help me continue with this show, please donate. There's a PayPal link in the show notes. Please become a patron. There's a link in the show notes. Share a link. Tell a friend about the show. There's links in the show notes. Give us a review on iTunes. Ideally 5 stars or a 4-star review that reads like a 5. Either way, do something, right? You're about to hear your mid-roll ad, and there's enough time while this mid-roll ad is playing to do 1 or 2 of those things. So, you ready? You getting ready? Here's your mid-roll advert. And we're back! I just wanted to take a second to say thank you to Jason. I can't thank him enough for taking the time out of the busy Edinburgh schedule to spend this amount of time with us and to impart so much knowledge and wisdom, even though he admittedly at the start thought his job's boring and not interesting and he's not going to have anything decent to say. He wanted me to make it very clear that all of the views expressed in this next part are his and not attributed to Avalon in any way. I think that goes without saying with all the episodes. Anyone who comes on is representing themselves and not the company that they are working for, unless they own the company, in which case then obviously they are representing their own company. But he wanted me to expressly point it out as we get into talking about how ideas are constructed for TV, how often ideas are realistically stolen for TV, whether you have to worry about people seeing things and sort of manipulating your jokes and using them on TV, all this sort of stuff, right? It's a very exciting second half. Let's jump back in.
I'm just conscious of not being a spokesperson for Avalon because I do one thing in one part of that company. For the most part, I've been a freelancer, so I'm not like, you know, I'm not the official voice saying this is. I can only talk about my experience of working there and maybe some of the misconceptions.
Completely, and I like to think on this podcast, everyone who comes on is unless they own the company, they are repping themselves rather than Avalon. So
lovely comedy boy.
Everyone on this is a massive nerd, so it's quite nice. So you want to talk a bit more about Edinburgh rather than TV?
Yeah. As in, I don't know if that's of interest in terms of, because obviously I come up with a completely different agenda to what performers come up with. So
yeah. So how do you look for shows? Like, how do you narrow down? Because obviously the program's huge.
Yeah.
So do you come up with the head of, not with the head of? Do you come up with your hat on of TV is probably going to look for X, Y, and Z? I'll start looking through and finding X, Y, and Z, or do you go, I wonder what's interesting, and then we could take it to TV and try and pitch it? Do you know what I mean?
It's usually it's a bit of everything. So it depends obviously on the agenda of that month. So right now I'm doing development, so I've got a bit of a broader, what's the word? It's so early, Simon.
Remit?
What's the word? Remit.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a broader remit. Whereas if I was coming up, previous years, if I've come up specifically looking for stand-ups, then I'll only go see stand-up, and then I can't go see any sketch. So what I am quite ruthless about is not seeing things for pleasure. So I've never seen a Daniel Kitson show in Edinburgh, for example, because I know he doesn't do TV, so there's no justification. So I go through the brochure. So I've got like three. This might be quite boring admin. I always go through the brochures. That's my first protocol. And
cover to cover.
Was it
cover to cover, or just a comedy section?
Or just a comedy section. Yeah. I don't really see much theatre unless something's been specifically recommended in a relation and is related to comedy. So, and I've got like a timetable, and I've put all the shows that sort of catch my eye in those timetables, so I can see like, okay, so in that slot there's 10 shows I want to see, in that slot there's 8 or whatever. So my starting point is always my own interest in what I'm seeing. It's a combination of, especially as time's gone on, there'll be acts that I know that I have a professional relationship with, and it's in my interest to go see what they're doing this year and to chat to them about where they're at and whatnot. So there'll always be a handful of acts that I know what they do, but I'm coming up to see what they are doing this year. Obviously you always leave space for newer acts and surprises. So what I try and do, but it's really hard, is to leave gaps in my schedule that if something catches fire as a show, like I went to see Jack Tucker last night, for example, because that's kind of been a word of mouth hit, and I deliberately left, since now that we're near the end of the festival, I've deliberately left space that I could fill that in to go see that, because that's obviously I think think to sort of decide in July that this is everything I'm seeing is silly, because you have to be reactionary to what's actually happening. And then agents email, and so I tend to be more partial towards specific recommendations from agents. If they go, I've got these 12 acts going up, but this one person I think you'll really like, and they're up your street, then I'll always try and that's partly, obviously, and the main thing is trying to see really good acts that are of interest, and the other thing is you never know when they will become of interest. So even if there's not an immediate thing like, I've seen that person, I'm going to put them on this, 6 months down the line you might be asked, who are like a sketch group that are doing something really interesting, or is there a comedian talking about this, or is there someone that's really good at writing gags and you're like, there's someone that I saw at the Fringe. I don't know if that's a useful thing for acts to know, that if they know someone's coming along to their show and then they never hear anything, that's not necessarily to say that it's not been useful, the person's not liked you. It's like you've just went in their bank and you'll probably never know how that person has actually then helped you they've recommended you to someone else. So I'm a blabbermouth, so I love talking about all the shows I go to see, and so I try and tell as many people as possible and always get asked for recommendations and that sort of thing. So I'd like to think I've got quite a good rigid system of making sure that I don't miss anything. But then before we started recording, you told me about the show with the 4 acts that are working class, and was it 8 acts?
Well, there's 8 of them, but they rotate it round.
Right.
So it's called Best in... this is not helpful. Oh, actually, no, it is helpful, because they're doing it around the country now, not just in Edinburgh.
Oh, okay.
So it will actually, they did a London one, which was actually to sort of crowdfund for the Edinburgh show. Yeah. So all the money went back into the Edinburgh show. It's called Best in Class. It's got 8 working class acts, and so they sort of have 4 a week, but they move it around, so it's not as rigid as you've got a week. I think. Yeah. I'm not on it, so I don't know, and I have no affiliation except for 2 of my friends are doing it. Okay, and so they shared it on Facebook, and then I messaged them about it, and they said, it's like this, consortium of working class acts who either couldn't afford or couldn't do the Fringe on their own back, so decided to go on it together. It's sort of an extension of the two-hander thing that most people do when they start, because I think most people who do a two-hander can afford Edinburgh, which is why they do it as a split rather than this, which is essentially saying these costs are getting out of control, which I think's a fair comment. Yeah.
But that's an oversight from my point of view, because I'm interested. Class feels a very zeitgeisty topic, for TV and in general, and as a personal interest. So. I'm annoyed that I've missed that.
I'm sorry.
But that's the thing as well. You do have to be you have to be aware of whatever intel I have in terms of what channels are interested in. You do take that into when you're looking at stuff as well. There was a good example though of something coming out of nowhere was, so this is 2012, 2013. I kind of scoured websites looking at recommendations, and Louisa Omulan, What Would Beyonce Do, was recommended. And I'd never heard of her, and I think at that point she'd just done a lot of improv and stuff, so she hadn't really done. And so it was the first week in the Fringe. I went and I took someone from Avalon, just more as I'm going to see this person. I have no idea what. I'm just taking a punt. And I remember walking into the room. So there was a massive queue, which was interesting because you're like, okay, this early on, there's clearly a little bit of buzz, but I hadn't heard anything. Walked in and there's party music blaring, and Louisa's kind of stomping around chatting to people, and immediately I was like, I've made a massive mistake. This is not. It was a free Fringe show, and it felt like someone that had, I don't know, someone that it felt, but there was something about her where it was like she just rocked up and was doing, and it didn't really feel like she was doing stand up. And then within 2 minutes, myself and the person I was with were staring at each other, going, "Oh my god!" And that became the big hit of Edinburgh that month. And that's such a. I've always tried to remember that as a bar of going you've got to go take chances on things, but it gets harder and harder, and especially if I'm not up for the whole month as well. That's the thing. There's just it's so hard when you talk to someone. I think I might have said this last time we were talking, but it's so hard when you talk to someone and they want you to come and see their show, and to them it's like they've got one show 1 hour a day. How can you not make the time to see it? But there's also, I've got 10 other shows on my timetable there that I'm trying to squeeze in. So it's hard because you always feel like you're missed. There's, I might see 100 shows in a Fringe, but I'm always gonna miss more because there are more on. And I do try. I see 6-7 a day, which I know comedians might kind of scoff at, but it's not easy watching that much comedy.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I think there's a sweet spot for how many shows you can see in a day and actually still enjoy them. Because by the time I've seen maybe 5 shows a day, or if I go and see 5 shows, which is rare, I normally go and see 3. If I go and see 5 shows a day, or if I were to, by the 5th one, I'm probably not going to laugh. Like, I'm going to enjoy it, but I'm going to be laughed out, and it would take a lot to get me to laugh by that point.
Yeah.
Because who watches by the time you've watched 6 hours of Netflix of like a comedy, you're enjoying it, but you're just like, I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? Like, I know this, and it's not going to enjoy.
And even like with true crime, you're like, murder doesn't feel like a big deal now.
Exactly.
I've watched 6 hours of details on it.
Exactly. Well, that's me at 3 a.m. with conspiracy theories. I'm just like, the Illuminati could be murdering us, guys. We gotta stop them. But I just wondered how you keep your mind fresh for shows. Because obviously the 5th show, for example, has a massive disadvantage to the first show.
Yeah.
Or even the first show, if you're, like, say the first show after this, you said you're a bit tired now, maybe, that might have a disadvantage for them, and maybe the middle show is actually the best show. So I'm wondering how you take that into account, because obviously you maybe can't see it more than once, because like you said, haven't got the time for that. So how do you keep fresh, or at least be more objective than maybe some reviewers are when they maybe get a text before a show that's upset them, and then they do a bad review, or whatever it is? So.
Red Bull. Genuinely, I never drink Red Bull outside of the Edinburgh Festival, but I absolutely cane the stuff. There is I think there's just there's a reality to the fact that you're just not going to be able to be. But I always sit at the back, so I'm not, because then if I'm not able to laugh, even though I'm enjoying it, I'm not a problem. But I just try and concentrate on the stuff, and I know when I'm tired, so. I can still watch a show, but it goes the other way. So like if I'm watching a show and I'm finding it really funny and the audience isn't, or it's just a quiet day, I can still see a good show, even if personally my body language isn't necessarily displaying that. But it's just hard. I always think that with the awards as well, though, is that it's no wonder that the shows that get nominated for the most part are shows that have got a really memorable hook. It's not like an agenda. I think it's just that if you've seen that many shows a day, what are you going to remember?
Yes.
You're going to remember someone that just did an hour of really banging stand-up, or you're going to remember someone with that story of something that's never that's only happened to them, and or there's a gimmick in the show that you don't forget. So it's just the way it is. But I'd rather see 7 a day and be tired than see 3 a day, because then the amount of shows and awkward conversations I'd be having would be much more. So it's better to see it still. So that's the approach I take. But especially when there's 10-minute gaps in between and stuff, it's very tough.
Yeah, I think that's good for people to hear, because I think we've all been in a show where an industry person or just an audience member's been in who hasn't been laughing, and then afterwards said, "Oh, it's a great show, I really enjoyed it." And your mind as a comedian wants to go, "Well, fucking laugh then."
Yeah, I know.
But the reality is, I've gone to shows before that I've really loved, and I just haven't laughed.
Yeah.
And it isn't because they weren't funny; it's because I'm tired of laughing, or because so something else.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like you're the only other person in the room that's not there for pleasure. You're there for work, and the same with the person on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully, I enjoy the show and the person enjoys doing it, but you're just there for a different reason, and so you just. Yeah, again, I've hopefully just after having seen so many shows, I can recognise a good one in spite of my how personal, personal I'm feeling. And that's the other thing as well. The one thing I will say as well is I do try and have a respect for, I don't go out and get hammered during the Fringe. Like, I've had nights where I've stayed up to 4 or 5, but I'll stop. I'll never be really drunk or anything, because it's not fair especially when you've been given free tickets to stuff in a professional capacity, to show up hungover, yawning and whatnot, because that's disrespectful. So you've got to, from my part, the best thing I can do, I know that there's an ugly side to the industry and people don't necessarily like TV people, but I will try and hold up my side of the bargain and be as professional as possible and show up. Don't walk out and watch the drink my Red Bull and not be and not like kind of show up in any way that impacts on how I view the show, other than just natural human tiredness.
Why do you think people don't like TV people?
I was trying to think about this, if there was an analogy. With the Edinburgh Festival, it's a trade fair, right? From my point of view. I think a lot of comics come up and they don't view it as that. It's like they love doing comedy, which is great. And as a comedy fan, like, I love that. But it's sort of like, now this might not work, Simon, as an analogy, but we can... But it's almost like,
go anyway. Let's try it.
But it's like you show up to a nightclub to scout dancers, but there's some people that are just dancing there for fun.
For fun, yeah.
And going up to them and being like, you could be, if you change that move, and they'll be like, I'm just here. Yeah, I'm just dancing for the people around me.
Yeah.
So you sort of feel like you're simultaneously a necessary part of the Edinburgh Festival and a hindrance.
get it. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because it's like the dance like nobody's watching kind of thing. Like that's what they want to do, but you're watching.
Yeah, and like if I'm introduced to someone, I try and avoid saying that I work in TV or that I just, and a lot of the times I think, especially if I'm with comics that I know, I think a lot of other comics just presume I'm an act, not because I'm funny, but because I don't bring it up, because it does just change I just feel an awkwardness about it, because I know that there's a baggage and we're not always looked at in the most favourable way. So few people get the benefit of TV people, you know, in the grand scheme of the industry, I think.
Totally. For my way of looking at that is the other way around. So I don't work in TV, and I've never really done anything for TV in that capacity. And so my problem with it, if I'm honest with you, and with TV people in general, is the change in the mood that other people have. That's what frustrates me. So it's a bit like I did a gig with, and I'm going to keep them anonymous because I don't want to come off name droppy, but I did a gig at the Stand, and they had a really big headliner, and I was just chatting to another comedian, and when they walked in, everyone in the room just, like, not stared, but like it just went a bit quiet, as if to sort of go, we need to talk to them, or they might, be, as if like they had something to offer, or it's a famous person in the room. And I just carried on chatting to the person I was with. I noticed they were there, and then they said, oh, can you pass me a drink from in the green room in the Stand? They have like a fridge for things, and I happened to be next to it, and I passed them the drink, and then after I'd finished, I just said hi, and the person was much more amenable to me because I hadn't treated them differently than that, and then I found it uncomfortable then to speak to anyone else in the room, just because they sort of, you know what I mean, like you felt weird. And I feel like when someone mentions it on TV, the immediacy, so I don't go to like any of the bars like Loft Bar or Abattoir or anything, because I feel like immediately if someone hears someone's an agent or something, they think they're going to get signed from sitting around drinking with them. And it's like, unless they brought you there for the drink, it's highly unlikely they're going to just go, oh, I'd love to sign you, or I'd love to put you on my program. They've not seen you do any work, they've seen you have a drink, and that's, so that's the only thing that...
I do actually know someone that got signed because they were funny.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, fine, okay.
He's doing really well now.
There's one.
But it's so funny, it's so weird, because I remember being like, at the time, like, really? They've signed them based on the fact that they hosted drinks in their house? Weird. Yeah,
wow,
I'll tell you who that is.
Off air. But that's, fine. There's been one in the history of comedy.
In general, you're right. So again, it's like, I'm trying not to sound like a wanker, but you do, with some people...
This podcast is for that. You're absolutely fine.
But you do become aware of that change, and actually you just want to have a conversation. You just want to socially have a conversation. But then again, it's like, you're aware of why you're there in a professional capacity, and... So it's not like it's a problem. The worst part is if you've seen someone's show and not liked it.
Yes.
Because that doesn't make them a bad person.
No.
And it doesn't make me a bad person for it not being my thing. But you might bump into each other socially, and it's like, do we talk about the show, do we not? And really, there's just no reason why you can't just sit there and talk about something else. Like, it doesn't make anyone in the process bad.
Completely.
I find it very difficult. That's why I try and avoid bringing it up. Not because I'm like, oh god, now everyone's going to be like, oh, TV guy, but more just that it can sometimes have that bit of baggage where I'd rather just sit and have a chat with someone. It's difficult. And I get what you're saying. I think that's completely true as well. There's just sometimes it just changes. It's the way it changes people around you.
And so let's talk about when you like a show, and you maybe don't want to work with them straight away, but you want to start a relationship beyond just being someone in the audience. Would you go up to them immediately after? Would you drop them an email? Are you one for maybe trying to meet up with them later on in the week? Because obviously talking to someone after a show is not necessarily the best time, and we all know that, but also it is quite a good time because you're there, they're there, they might not have time, you might not have time. What's your process for carrying on that relationship if you wanted to, rather than just keeping them in your back pocket for a show if you down the line?
So nothing makes my skin crawl more than the idea of going up to someone after a show and be like, hi, I'm actually a TV producer, I loved your show.
I didn't mean you mentioned your job.
If it's someone that I know and they're at the door, and obviously with a lot of shows now, a lot of the comics are at the door, if I know that they know me and they knew I was coming, I'd quickly go, hi, I'm Jason from Avalon, I really enjoyed that, but then I go. I don't stand and talk to them necessarily. I mean, there might be a few occasions where I have, if it was relevant, but I certainly don't do any business chat there and then after the show. I don't think that's appropriate. It's like someone's they've just come off stage, and also there's a lot of audience members that want to chat to them, and that's more important, I think. and like, from an immediate sense. The other thing is that some acts don't want to meet during Edinburgh because they're in the headspace of the show. So if it's someone I've liked, so there was an act last year that I just loved, and I messaged him and I'd said, look, I'd love to just sit and chat with you. I was like, I don't have anything specific, but I just would like to kind of just introduce myself and understand a bit more about what you're doing. If you don't have the headspace for it in Edinburgh, let's do it in September. And he said, I'd love to do that in September. So we met up in September. Yeah, again, it's usually stems from if I'm aware that they know I'm there, I'll follow up because I don't want them to think I wasn't a fan, or I'll go to the agent and say if there's an agent involved, I'll say I love that show, I'd love to chat to them in September, and then they'll probably relay that. Yeah, I mean, Edinburgh, it is a really great. I mean, you live in London. It's like the idea of setting up meetings in London is like ridiculously hard. Timings and all that sort of thing. So it is really useful. And I do try and do that. But what I'm very mindful of, and might have even been guilty of in the past, is you meet with someone that you really liked, and I think they sometimes think that you're going to sit down and go, let's do let's do a show, and you can't promise anyone the world. You're kind of just saying, I do work with a company that makes stuff. I really like the show, and let's maybe this is the start of a professional relationship. What I've tried to do as a strategy for development is identify acts that I think are just on the cusp, and trying to think out, so meeting with them, then going away thinking of an idea based on maybe something they've suggested or something I've thought of from their show, and have an idea that's good to go when they do have the momentum and the cachet with commissioners. That's sort of my strategy, which is not a short-term successful one, to be honest, is having ideas and a producer, myself, good to go with that talent, that if they suddenly win the Edinburgh Award and the channel starts swarming around them, they can go, I've got a show and I've got a producer and a production company all good to go. That's the way I feel. That's the way with my development stuff, that's how I want to work. But yeah, sometimes it's just it's going to be a longer term thing, and you do just want to, what I definitely don't do is I don't just meet with someone just because I want to meet them, just to say hi. I usually would try and have something in mind. But there's occasional cases, like again the act I mentioned last year. He's quite a unique act, and I think I just wanted him to know that he was on radar, and that there's a telly person that is interested in engaging with him with ideas, because I think he probably felt like he's too weird to be considered for that stuff. So it's partly that.
I think that's also really, and that's great that you do that, because I think, like you said, a lot of the conversations happen. So by the time you get invited in to even try for a spot on Stand Up Comedy Central or whatever, there's been about 30 conversations behind the scenes that you're not aware of, and I think it's worth people knowing, especially if they're a weirder act, that you're in the mix. Because often it stifles creative. I mean, I see it here all the time, where I'll go and I'll do a compilation show, and I'll see 4 acts, and I'll go, you look like you're trying to be the comedian you've seen on TV.
Yeah.
Or you look like you're trying to be what you think a comedian is, and I think you'd be a lot funnier and a lot more interesting if you just did something that you liked rather than what you think will sell.
Yeah.
And so. And that's what I think slows down a lot of creativity here, is when you have to come with, it's a show business thing. You have to come with the mind of, I'm going to do a show, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to do that. But you also have to go with, how am I going to sell tickets? How do you pitch it to people? How do you get them in the door? How do I get industry in the door at an arts festival that's a trade fair?
Yeah.
And I think I think the second half is the hard bit for most comedians, because most of us just want to do the performing and have fun and get the thing to be funny. Whereas, a lot of us could benefit from knowing that just because we're it doesn't have to be watered down for TV, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big misconception for people when they watch TV, because I as someone who has friends who watch TV still, I don't have a TV, but a lot of friends who watch them complain and go, oh, there's nothing good on, or whatever, I watched this thing and it was awful, or whatever it is. And they'll often say it's because, it's all, I like them more when I saw them live. They didn't have to not say words, and I have to remind them, it's a channel, they can say that you don't want swearing or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
also, I think sometimes things just don't translate. They're just built for live. They're there to be enjoyed in the room. And trying to take them to TV, there's just something's lost, because there's a second audience watching it. There's the audience in the room, and there's nothing worse than you're sat watching TV at home and you're like, this is a show that's been done to other people, and I'm observing that. This is not a show that's aimed. It's not aimed at. I don't mean in terms of demographic. I mean the show's actually not being performed for me at home.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's worth just acknowledging that, like, kind of, you know, there's certain acts that are brilliant, and just because they won't translate to TV, it's not TV's fault, and it's not their fault. It's just, that's just the way it is. It's just that what they do is very much an in the room experience. Sometimes TV's guilty of that, of trying to fit. So again, and trying to take what someone does live, and they do water it down, and then they ruin it. And actually, it's like, maybe just it wasn't ever supposed to be converted to TV. The other thing that's brutal, by the way, is I've had an agent tell me so and so's looking forward to you come to the show, and they really want your feedback. And I've then spoken to them afterwards, and they did not want my feedback. And that's horrible, because you're like, well, I've got no entitlement to tell you to give critique or anything, but I thought you wanted it.
Totally.
And I was told that they wanted it, and it was really awful. And that's another thing as well, is that the Fringe, it's so difficult for performers. I can be an awkward person at the best of times, and I get so concerned that I'm just going to say the wrong thing. You just never know. I mean, by God, like, I've learnt the hard way that some acts don't read reviews, so don't talk about it. I've went up to someone and been like, I thought that review was really harsh. I mean, this is like early days of Fringe. And they're like, what review? What? It was just horrible. And so I've learnt lessons along the way as well in terms of tact with acts, because, as you say, the most important thing actually for the month is the show and the audiences, I think.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, because obviously you've said that you leave gaps for word of mouth and for outlying shows that, you know, maybe you've never heard of. So I'm wondering, because from my perspective, a lot of that happens from other acts. So acts checking out other things and telling them stuff. And I assume at Avalon you will have acts who you will speak to and will say, oh, I went and popped in and saw this and it was great. Yeah. But I'm wondering whether like you said, you read some reviews. Is it reviews that help with that? Is it the audience reviews on the website? Is it a mix of the two, as well as like people telling you stuff? What kind of word of mouth do you put stock in? Are there areas of it that you go, I'm always going to read their reviews because I like them, and then I'll ask other people if they thought it was just, you know?
Yeah, I think people might not want to hear it. Reviews are a big source of, like, I've got like the British Comedy website.
If you listen really closely, there's a lot of comedians going, no.
But they have a roundup of everywhere of all the reviews that come in each morning, so I always read them first thing. Just because if there's something that's getting loads of traction, then you know your interest is going to be piqued. But the biggest source, so it's that. But then it is people around you, like I was going to say fellow industry professionals, but that feels mental. I've got to say, with comedians recommending shows, sometimes comedians love other comedians because they're doing something that they couldn't imagine, because they understand what it's like to be up there. They're more taken by the fact that, oh, that's such a risk to do that on. So it's not necessarily that it's actually good, it's the endeavour that comics appreciate and others a lot more. And so there's times that comedians have, like, you know, I've had loads of recommendation for one show, and I'll go and I'll be like, oh, you like this because this is a show for other comics.
I'm always wary when someone says that. Yeah.
Oh, you're aware of me saying
that?
No,
when anyone says this is a show for other comics, just because it feels like it's a backhanded compliment. Because it feels like you've written it for a very small select group of people that don't tend to find a lot of things funny.
But I think that sometimes does happen. I think sometimes comics get so in their head with the industry part of it that you forget that there's punters coming that have no idea what a callback is, or no idea, you know, like, again, but it's probably better to talk examples, and I don't want to do that. But what I mean is that there's certain acts that are brilliant live and chaotic, but if you're a straight stand-up that just does an hour of observations, you're absolutely blown away by that person and the mad stuff they're doing, because you couldn't imagine doing it. So you come out going, that was incredible, but it's not necessarily incredible for the other audience members. It's incredible to use a comic because you know that what it's like to be on stage, and you know what it'd be like to take chances like that. Does that make sense? Totally. I don't mean that the performer in the first place is trying to alienate the audience and only play to comedians. I just mean that it can, that in terms of why someone's recommending it, it's for that reason rather than because this is a great show as an audience member to go to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah. I find it interesting that so if you know when you're watching a show, or when you're watching someone perform, even in a compilation, I assume, do you go and see compilations, or do you only see solos?
Oh, you know, I used to quite a lot, and this year I haven't.
Except Best in Class, you're going to go.
Except Best in Class, yeah, which I will try to. But yeah, I don't know why actually. I think it's also because I'm doing development. I need to be like for the most part, my priority is working with acts that might be ready to go to TV in terms of ideas. When I was doing the stand-up slot, you could find a lot of, if someone doing a 20, if that 20 is great, then there's a chance you could put them straight onto. So I feel like I need to articulate this properly. So with development, if you're coming up with an idea for someone, that person needs to actually be able to carry a show, and they need to be more experienced. And an open spot isn't going to be able to carry their own TV show necessarily. And then there's also the profile, the profile issue. Are you going to get a show away with that person in it, right? Whereas when I was doing the Russell stand-up slot, there's loads of different stand-up slots. It's Russell Howard's show, it's not the guest. So there's more leeway in terms of who you book for it. So someone like Daniel Simonson wasn't a particularly big name when I booked him, but he had an absolutely amazing 15 to 20 minutes. And I think I actually saw him I think he was in the Comedy Reserve. And so I could book him for that, but I wouldn't have gone to see Daniel Simonson at that point and been like, he should have his own TV show, because he wasn't necessarily ready for that at the time, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That was sort of my next question, is like, because you're watching it with a sort of a lens, if you like. You're going, how will this look on screen, not just how it will look in the room when you're recording it for the screen. So I'm wondering whether there's an internal process when you're watching shows of going, okay, they're going to be amazing on the circuit, but that just won't work on TV, and how you, if you would ever give people advice on that and be like, I love the act, it's just in the moment that wouldn't, or even you can, for example, Louise Romalan, for example, a lot of when I've spoken to her before, but she says what I do takes an hour. Like what I do narratively takes an hour,
that's really true,
and so I can't do a 20-minute spot. And I mean, don't get me wrong, she's done spots on things more recently, but for a while everyone was, raving about that show, and it was doing very, very well.
Yeah.
And so I think when you looked at it, you were like, I don't think she could do a shorter spot. Not my personal preference, but that's what some people, and she was saying, some people were saying. So I'm wondering whether you will go and see an hour and go, fuck, that's an amazing hour. However, where are they going to do 20? What 20 can they take out of that? I don't know how they would they have a tight 20? Would they be able to keep to time? Would they, how do you deal with that sort of thing?
So I guess that's in specific relation to booking a set, a stand-up set. Well, there's definitely, so Nick Helm, when I sort of keep hold of the gold, and then he did the Russ Howard's Good News. Yeah. I knew that I really wanted him to do the show, but I also knew that some of it was chaotic, and so that process was, I had a very honest conversation with him about, we'd really like you to do it. Can you book in some gigs, and between the two of us, let's work on what the set could be, so that I know that I've got faith in the fact that what you're going to be recording for 20 minutes, he ended up doing nearly 30, but I know that I can edit that down. So that's the thing, is that you kind of go, sometimes you can let someone, because with the Good News slot, because they were recording 20 that got edited to 14, you could have a bit of leeway with certain routines of going, well, just record it, and maybe it doesn't go in, or maybe, as long as I know I could shorten it, it'd be fine. But yeah, sometimes you see someone and you're like, I always love Brian Gittins, but Brian Gittins just, I don't feel like, I mean, he might completely disagree, but I didn't ever feel like we'd work on Good News, and that was always a shame, because personally I loved him. And then I booked Nina Conti, who was fairly established at that time, to be fair, but with her there was no need to do 20 minutes. She could just do a tight 14, because she had an amazing I think it was like 2 routines, the thing with the mask, and there was no, it was like, well, that will just go in wholesale, because actually it couldn't. So the problem initially was, you can't edit that down, there's too much continuity, there's too many continuity issues. But actually you're like, well, we don't need her to do 20, it's brilliant just to have her go for 14. I remember once we had Reggie Watts, who does completely this is obviously not stemming out of Edinburgh, but doesn't have a set list, he just messes around and does music, and that was one of the biggest nightmares to edit ever. Worth it, because Reggie Watts, and he's great, but that was such a rare example, because you need to know that you can, in the end you're delivering content to a broadcaster, and no matter how much you love the act, you can't sacrifice, in the end what you can't sacrifice the fact that you're essentially just delivering. And if you can't do that, so I'm not being very articulate there, but I know that there was another show with an act, and she recorded a set that didn't go out because no one had been to see what she was going to do, and then she recorded it and they went, well, we can't edit that down. And you're like, that's crazy. So I would always work with the acts. If it was someone I really wanted, I'd work with, sorry, shorter answer, if it was someone I really wanted, I'd work with them on what that 20 could be, and just be very honest about what I needed. If it was someone that just wouldn't work at all, I just wouldn't go. I wouldn't try and take what someone does and ruin it just to make it work for the slot.
Totally. If you can't come to their Edinburgh show, and I'm aware that the true answer to this might mean you get more emails, but would it ever be worth sending you a clip of a set or of a show so you can watch it in your own time outside of Edinburgh? And also, is it worth inviting you to a Soho run, for example, if you couldn't make it to Edinburgh? How important, what I'm trying to ask here is, how important is this month versus if, for example, you couldn't make it this month, but they're doing some shows in London that are near you, would you still go and check them out after that? Has it got to be this month?
No, it's just the fact that if I see 7 shows in a day, that's 7 evenings in London. What about, on a very basic level, I see it especially as a producer in comedy, you have to go out and see comedy, right? But you don't get paid to go out and see comedy. You don't get paid extra overtime or anything for going to a gig at night. So what a lot of people don't appreciate is you work during the day, and especially when I was doing Good News, it was like, that was really long hours anyway. But at that time, when it was a stand-up slot, pretty much if you emailed me, I'd come and see you. There was a time where I was going out nearly every night of the week to see comedy, and that wasn't sustainable from I didn't have a life, basically. And again, it's not like you're getting paid overtime or anything for that, but I think it's an important part of the job and you should do it. If someone's been chasing me to see their Edinburgh show and I've not been able to see it, I feel guilty. And then if they've got especially if they've got a few dates in London, that's great, because then I can, there'll be one that hopefully should work. If they're just doing one date, that's sometimes more difficult. But I'd always try and come along. I do more and more people are recording it, and that's great as well, because to be able to fit it into my working hours in the office is way easier than me having to set aside an evening to go. But just to be clear, I do think it's important in this job that you do go out and see stuff, and you'll never get a better sense of someone than seeing them in the room. And people might feel a bit hesitant of sending poor quality, a poor quality recording of their show, but you can still see if the stuff's good, and if the audience are reacting. So it's definitely useful, and in some ways it's just as valid as Edinburgh. But in Edinburgh, you just got the opportunity to see a lot more in a day.
What I'm asking there is just I think a lot of people pedestal this festival, and for obvious reasons, because it is the biggest one in the world, and it is, or one of the biggest ones in the world, top 3. I think it's the second or the big whatever. And also it's, like you said, a good opportunity for you to manage your time better, because you can do 7 evenings in a day, for example. But I think there's a lot of people who have sent me messages, especially in the last week or so when I've been posting about pods I'm doing up here, going, like we said, I can't do it, and I feel like I'm going to get overlooked. And I often say to them, I don't think this matters, but you can get them to see you outside of it. Because most of the opportunity, this year's different for me. This one's a massive outlier, because this year I've had more industry in than ever, and I've had more interest than ever. But in terms of the last 3 shows I've done, it's always been when I do it in London, or if I take it around, I go to Brighton and I invite Mick Perrin, or so, it's always been somewhere else that something else has come out of it, rather than Edinburgh itself. And that mindset changed for me from my first to second show, where I was like, oh, Edinburgh isn't the ending, it's the start of a tour. No, but you know what I mean, when it's your first show, you think that's like the level up moment in a video game. I've done Edinburgh, start the next show. Whereas now in my head, it's like, no, I'm touring that one and writing the next one. And so you're on that cycle. And I think it's, especially for someone who's working in TV, because I think, you can invite bookers up here easier. So if you can't get to their club in Liverpool or whatever to do the 10-minute spot because it's too expensive to do that, it is easier to invite them to come and see you do a 10 spot here. But for TV people, I think that's the holy grail for a lot of people. And if they can't afford to do Edinburgh, I think they're getting overlooked.
I think the bigger problem is regionality, is not being able to see acts in Newcastle, or because it's so, and hopefully that's changing with the fact that Channel 4 and BBC have now set up offices elsewhere, and that's the biggest problem. Edinburgh's obviously incredibly important in terms of just it is the biggest trade fair, and you do pay more attention to that. You can build up momentum over a month and stand and be recognised for that. But it's also in some ways never been less important, because now you've got the capacity to upload stuff online, and for both industry people to watch, but also for people to watch. You know, if I see a clip of someone doing stand-up, you know, it's someone like Adam Rowe I came to see in Edinburgh because of how well his clips were doing online, you know, that he was recording at the Hot Water Club in Liverpool. So there's a greater capacity to be seen outside of Edinburgh now. There's also, as we were talking about the fatigue of seeing loads of Edinburgh shows, if you invite me to your show in London in September and that's the only thing I'm seeing that night, then it's more likely to leave an impact on me and for me to think about it more because I've come out specifically just to see that. It is also simultaneously harder to find people that will go. I mean, you know, I don't have kids, but a lot of people in telly, you know, will be married and have kids and they've got lives, and or they live out of London and whatnot, so it's not easy enough physically for them to make shows in the evening. And that in that way, you know, Edinburgh, you come up to see shows, so that's what you're doing. So yeah, I don't think that's a concise answer, but it's just more that there's so many different elements of it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Totally. We've got 2 minutes.
Okay.
And so I figured for the last bit of this,
We'll
it would
sing?
be... Huh?
We'll sing?
We can sing. Caroline? Sweet Caroline?
Yeah, it's too early. I've backed out.
Okay. I thought for the last 2 minutes, we could just quickly round up any common mistakes that you find people have trying to either impress you or get you to come to shows. So what tropes are you noticing people are doing because they think that's what TV people are looking for, maybe in their show or a set, and what people send you that put you off coming, not you know, because you know, their show isn't to your taste, but just like, I don't know, getting your name wrong in an email, for example, or things like that, so that people can just try and avoid common pitfalls.
Yeah, I mean, getting the name wrong in the email, that's interesting because it does make you feel like this is less tailored to me, but on a basic level it shouldn't matter because it's just an admin error. It's really... let me think of this before I answer. I think I brought this up earlier when we were chatting before. I think being careful about when you're seen for the first time is important. You should think about when you start inviting people, especially people in telly, you should be close to being ready. But then it's hard because as an act, when do you gauge when you're ready for that? You've never been better than you are at that point, right? But I do think being careful about when you are seen first is important. I'm thinking of like people that chase me a lot on email, and sometimes they just become this person that chases you on email, but then actually there's people that I've gone to see because it's like they are persistent. It's like, oh, they specifically want me to see the show. You know what it is? It's just that I just feel like sometimes no right or wrong way. Like the greatest thing, like I say, I've said this before, but if you just come up with a really great show that you've worked really hard on and audiences love it, and it's then, and I know this is a bit more selective, but it then gets the momentum from reviews and audience and word of mouth, that is way more powerful than anything. Like, you know, to go to see something that has organically created that momentum is the thing that has the most effect in making me want to see something. But I also think it's just think about why you're doing it. Like there's so many shows that I see up here where they're just not ready or they've just not been worked on hard enough. And take out the industry part of it. If you're spending like $5,000 to come up for the month, put the effort in. I once saw, and I had an argument with someone about this actually. There's someone I once saw, and the show was, I think I can say objectively awful. The audience clearly didn't like it, so I can't say objectively awful.
Well, you not say their names, so you can say objectively awful. You know,
it felt like that. They didn't have an ending for the show. It petered out. It was underwritten. It was under time significantly. It just wasn't very good. And then later that night, I saw them out getting hammered and having an amazing time in Brooks Bar. And I was like, God, if that was me, I'd be at home trying to work out how to make this show better. And there was someone I said this to, and they're like, yeah, but if you've had a bad day at work, sometimes you might want to go out with your friends and let off steam. It's not for you to say. But I sort of feel like it's such a... the one thing that makes me so guilty is that so many comics are spending so much money up here. And that's why, like, in terms of my small part, I take it really seriously because I'm aware of how much it means to act. You know, I'll never waste a comp. I'll never show up drunk. I never drink alcohol in shows or anything like that because I'm aware of what my role is. But similarly, as a comic, when you've got paying punters coming in, getting so swept up in all the industry of it and all that, and what other comics are doing, it's like, just play to what's in front of you. Like, if people are paying money to come and see you, give them value for money and work really hard on that show that you're doing. And I guess also think about in a more industry sense, is think about why are you doing it? What is it about you that is different to everyone else? What have you got to say that makes you worth seeing? Because that then translates across the board to both audience and industry, is your reason for doing it and what makes you different, or just working so hard that you're at a level of quality that you're unrivaled, or that there's just not many people are as good as you. I feel like that's a really messy answer, but I think one thing that hopefully we get from these conversations is that it's a really messy industry, and and I think people want, and I guess the thing with this podcast is you want the answers, right? And in some ways, but you're exploring. You're exploring, but actually, there's no truth to it.
No, I used to, and now I just think to myself, you know what? It's it's so random, the whole industry, even though we like to think it's more of a meritocracy, that you can't take things personally, and you can't think, they're against me or that they're not, or like you said, you have to get this more and more. This is becoming more about becoming empathetic to your side of this.
Yeah.
Because from my perspective, I could sit there and go, it's only an hour a day. Why don't you come see it? But the reality is, your day is 7 shows a day plus other things you're doing for other people, plus maybe trying to see a friend every now and then if they're up here or whatever, or in between things you want to get some food, or like something over,
I found myself in a car park eating chips and cheese it was the first week I was up, and it was just, I couldn't find anywhere to eat, and it was pouring rain. I was holding my umbrella in my left hand and like balancing the chips on my knee. Yeah.
Glamour of TV.
Yeah, and then exactly. And then I had a meeting to go to half an hour later, and I thought, if only you could have seen me half an hour ago. But then the other thing is that I'm here, and I've got people above me, and I'm trying to impress them, and I've got commissioners and that I'm like, why are they not considering my show that I've pitched to them? So I'm working the same, to the same pressures and asking the same questions in a very different, but in a slightly different way. But yeah, it's just hard, isn't it? I think the Fringe is, in some ways, it's just amazing. But I see so much of the personal sacrifice and how hard it is for people, and unfortunately, you can't put everyone on telly. Not everyone's right for telly. Maybe I should just go back to being a punter, Simon. I could just enjoy it and feel free and not have to worry about the comics afterwards.
That sounds horrible. Well, thank you very much for coming back on. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
That was Jason. Hearing about how Avalon operates was so interesting to me. I've always loved looking at it from the outside and seeing how big they've got and how influential they are, and just the level to which they are able to operate. It's just a defining entity within the comedy industry. Has been really excited to get a peek behind the curtain. Has been really cool. I learned loads about how shows are put together, from how the ideas are formed or how the formats are pitched to him, to how they get to look on TV, to how much care goes into the edit on TV. I think we've mentioned it quite a bit in the show. It's very easy for you to sit at home and say, no, there's nothing good on TV today, because, you don't like it, or because you're not sure. Or we've all said stuff like, oh, they're a much better act when they're live. Well, that's because they've been edited. And as we said, editing is a really good thing. If I didn't edit this podcast, it would be fucking awful, right? So it's worth it. It's worth taking time. I hope you really enjoyed it. I really loved this. If you did enjoy it, you might also enjoy the episode with Chris Sussman from BBC Studios, or Rob Popper from Popper Studios. Both are linked in the show notes, or you can scroll back and find them yourselves. If you've enjoyed this and you want to support the show, which you bloody should, if you've been enjoying this, even just this episode, but if you've been enjoying the show for a while and you've done nothing to support it, or you've been like, well, I've just been listening, it's not really, don't switch off now. Just right, okay. First thing you can do, check out the show notes on my website and see where I'm gigging. If I'm gigging near you, please come. I'm in Melbourne, Adelaide, Wellington and Dunedin in the next couple of months. I'd really appreciate any support. If you know anyone in those places, or you're in those places, please buy a ticket. If not, please leave us a review. 5 stars ideally. If not, a 4 that reads like a 5 would be perfect. If you've already done that, please make a donation. PayPal links in my show notes, or you can become a patron from $1. Was this worth 80p? It's got to be worth 80p. This was nearly 12 hours of editing for me, plus 4 hours of recording with Jason. It's got to be worth 80p of your time. So if you can donate, that'd be absolutely amazing. If you can't donate, just share a link. Tell a friend. Pass it on social media. Tag me in it and I'll thank you. Thank you very much for everything and anything you do to help this project continue. The RC Industry Podcast is a Fruit That Got in Gravity's Way production for the internet. All elements were created by me, comedian Simon Caine. Thank you very much for listening, thank you very much for subscribing, and thank you very much for rating and donating if you do. I'll see you all in about 14 days' time. Bye!